Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us. We are very excited to share with you the Railway to Recovery, what we believe is a comprehensive decision support system for you as the FRC. Where we are today is a crucial point in our history, and we want to help you begin to help others on their Railway to Recovery. So I want to first start by quickly recapping the available resources and responsibilities that you as the FRC has. So we have determined that the FRC has two main resources and several considerations and responsibilities as it moves forward with your mission in this great recession. So we also, our first of these resources, or your first of these resources, is economic security and human capital. We're also going to consider various types of impact that the FRC will have on various different groups and the stakeholders to whom you will be responsible as we move forward. So perhaps the most obvious is the economic security that the FRC has to offer. So this $8 billion per year budget is a huge increase, and it's going to be used to help communities flourish. But you don't just have money. You also have a vast amount of human capital. This is coming in the form of something like expertise, right? You have the engineers, you have the financial analysts, you have the accountants, and the availability to help out with budget making decisions, creating and developing and maintaining capital improvement plans. And then, of course, you also have intergovernmental collaboration at your disposal. This has two main components in that you'll, of course, be able to bridge both state and local governments, differing governments, in order to help them work together. But you're also going to be able to help facilitate the public-private partnerships, which are going to be necessary as you continue on with these private railway owners. We also want to make sure that you're considering the various types of impact that the FRC will have on these high-speed passenger rails. So, of course, there's the social impact. You want to think about the social well-being of the citizens. You want to make sure that you are bringing good to these communities. There are also a variety of other types of impact, including economic impact. You want to make sure that you're promoting positive growth of the economy as you're moving forward. You also want to make sure that you're considering the environmental impact, and we will be discussing a little bit later in the presentation about the steps that you will need to take in order to mitigate the negative risks and to assess that the states and governments who are implementing this will also be mitigating the negative risks. And of course, you are held accountable to a variety of key stakeholders. Congress wants to make sure that you are being financially responsible. They want to make sure that the money that they've collected and then allocated is being put to good use. State and local governments, they want what's best for their people. They want to make sure that you are as invested as they are and that good will be coming to their people in this tough time. Environmental groups want to make sure that environmental assessments will be conducted, that the appropriate steps and measures will be taken to ensure the most minimal negative impacts. And then lastly, of course, the FRC and any of the governments associated with these projects will be held liable to the American people. They want to make sure that their tax money is going to a good investment and that they're going to be reaping the benefits from all of these projects.
All right, thanks, Allison. So when evaluating applicants, the FRC needs a comprehensive evaluation system. So what we're going to propose for you today is the RIDE model. And the RIDE model follows four main criteria. So the first is responsible program implementation. The second is incorporation of safe practices. The third is dependable economic growth. And the fourth is environmentally conscious development. So in the next few slides, you're going to notice a graphic to the right side of the screen. This is going to show the key stakeholders which are impacted by each of the individual criterion. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is responsible program implementation. So there are a few things that you're going to be looking at as the FRC when you're looking at different applicants. So the first is their ability to meet standards. So specifically, can they do things such as meet the matching funds and show a demonstrated ability to do things such as that. But furthermore, we're going to make sure that you evaluate the bond ratings. Specifically, most of these governmental bodies have a history of capital projects. So we're going to look at historically, have they been successful in paying those back? Furthermore, we're going to make sure all applicants turn in detailed plans showing exactly how they plan to get their project off the ground, and then you as the FRC will do a feasibility study to see if these plans are actually practical in practice. But finally, we're going to look to see if the applicant has the ability to access private partner investors, because at the end of the day, if there is outside private capital, this greatly increases the likelihood of success and makes it a more feasible project to fund. So the second thing we'd like to talk about is the incorporation of safe practices. because we believe any type of construction project, any type of new high-speed rail development needs to be safe in all phases. So we've identified 3 main phases. The first is construction. So basically, any type of high-speed rail that's being constructed, we need to make sure that the trains are being manufactured in a safe manner, that all the work sites are fenced off so wild animals or pedestrians don't get caught in there and no one's put at risk. But finally, we need to make sure that workplace safety is always upheld, that all these different applicants are making sure that they meet all OSHA standards and are not putting any workers into harm's way. But the second phase we need to make sure is that any type of land that's being procured is actually safe for the development of train tracks and can actually be used for high-speed rails. The third and final is once these high-speed rail systems are developed, will the travelers actually be safe? We want to make sure that there's security and emergency protocols. So we have systems in place in case something goes wrong to make sure that riders are kept safe. We need to make sure that the operations run well as well. So based on the data we had from the New York Times, there have been very few incidents of collisions in high-speed rails in systems such as Japan and Europe. We want to make sure that we continue that, so we need to have contingency plans and basic protocols to make sure that these high-speed rails are continued to be operated in safe ways. Right. So the third criterion is dependable economic growth. So because we are in the midst of the Great Recession, because we're receiving funding as part of the American Reinvestment Recovery Act, we have an obligation to stimulate the economy. So when you're choosing applicants to fund as the FRC, we want to make sure that we're meeting this obligation. So there are a few ways we're going to do this. First, we need to make sure that any type of bid that we are funding follows the model of having job creation and promoting the labor supply. So we want to make sure that you're drawing from specific pools. Are you hiring local workers that can actually stimulate the local economies? Specifically, are we reaching out to unemployed workers so we can actually boost the number of people working and actually create multiplicative returns towards the economy? These are things that we should be looking at when we're determining which projects to fund. But furthermore, we need to look at the growth potential and capacity. Are these sites that you're ultimately going to give money to places where you can develop industry, can develop commerce, and can actually see these gains? These are things which ultimately must be taken into account. But furthermore, we need to do a cost-benefit analysis because we know at the end of the day, there's never been an instance of a train system which has turned a profit. But we want to make sure that these deficits are minimal and that these projects can be sustained in the long run with limited outside funding because we think it's a valuable public service. We want to make sure it's a public service we can continue to run 10 years into the future. But finally, we need to look at positive externalities. How will these high-speed rails improve the quality of life of these individuals and lead to other forms of economic growth? These are all things which you need to evaluate when you're determining who to give funding to. But the fourth and final thing that we need to look at is environmentally conscious development. So unfortunately, any type of development, any type of construction in the short term will have some negative environmental impacts. So what we want to make sure is when you're choosing applicants that you're choosing ones who have the minimum impact to the environment and do it in the most responsible way. So we want to make sure it's the least invasive possible procedures when they are actually setting up these high-speed rails and things such as that, and that all environmental standards, such as those set by the EPA as well as local bodies, are being upheld at all times. So we want to make sure that this is something which the applicants can demonstrate. But we think even though there are some short-term environmental harms, we think in the big picture this is actually very beneficial towards the environment. So we want to make sure that the applicants can actually demonstrate how they're going to help the environment in their progress. So what we're going to say is that they need to show projections based on the number of people who will be switching from things such as using cars, such as using airplanes which emit high amounts of CO2, and based on this we can actually project the amount of reduction we have in greenhouse gas. This can show if these projects are environmentally sustainable and things that you should be funding as the FRC.
Thank you. And now after utilizing the RIDE assessment model, you're going to move into the second phase, which is implementation. And today we have identified some of the challenges or concerns that you may be confronted with throughout the process, as well as offer solutions and resolutions to these challenges. The first challenge we've identified for you today is industry competition. Now we know there are 4 main competitors to the HSPR. We have the personal cars, buses, airplanes, and the slow train Amtrak. And so the challenge is how can you convince the customers of the competition to switch over to the HSPR? And furthermore, the second challenge that we have identified is on top of the portion of the clients that you win over, is there sufficient demand to make this project feasible and justifiable? So the solutions that we offered to you today in regards to industry competition is that right now we're in the Great Recession. We're in the midst of something we haven't seen since the Great Depression. This means that there's much constraint on personal budgets right now. And people decide to travel, not to travel, or how to travel based on 2 main factors, cost and convenience. And we are certain that HSPR will have a comparative advantage on both fronts. Why? Because using this high-speed rail is more convenient than having to transfer 5 buses to get to a city 5 hours away. It's more convenient and definitely more affordable than buying a plane ticket, going to the airport, waiting in the TSA line for another hour and a half. It's more convenient and many times more affordable than driving your own car to the city, paying for gas, as well as paying for parking in the city for the weekend. And it categorically beats out Amtrak. Now, the second challenge that we've identified is sufficient demand. So on top of the people that you win over from the competition, is there sufficient demand? And we believe, we know there is. There's enough people right now, they're sitting at their home, they're not traveling, or they're indifferent to travel because of the inconvenience or the high cost. So with the introduction of this new option, this more convenient option, people will decide to be active. They will decide to leave their house. They'll stop being indifferent. It'll be convenient, it'll be easy, and it'll be affordable. It will happen. So further on, we have also identified the third challenge, or another challenge, which is another demand concern. Is there enough demand or sufficient demand from the bidders to make the process competitive? Now, everybody understands that through competition, the best result will happen, or competition yields the best result. And if the process is not competitive enough, it is hard to say whether or not the result is the best outcome. Therefore, the solution that we pose or we offer you today is twofold. First, the FRCU must disseminate the information about the funding adequately and thoroughly. This means that every local and state government must be aware that the funding exists, how much the funding is there, as well as how to access those funds. And furthermore, the evaluation process of the bids must be very clear. Why? Because people trust what they understand. They understand what is clear. So therefore, if the local and state governments and everybody in this country understands and is aware that the fundings exist, they understand the process of how to access it, and they trust the system of evaluating those bids, you'll get enough bids, enough interest to make the process competitive, which will result in the best outcome.
Another challenge is the cost. We understand that constructing high-speed railways are going to cost a significant amount of resources at a time when our nation is in a great recession. Therefore, using the RIDE model, we're able to evaluate applicants so that they're committed to ensuring economic growth in the communities that the railways will be built. Which takes us to our next challenge, project sustainability. Here we're going to ask two things. First, does the bidder have the money to complete the project? And two, does the bidder have the labor supply and the political will to ensure that the project will be completed? It's a twofold process. And in order to manage these challenges, we recommend the implementation of a regular auditing program. And this program will monitor how the project is progressing. It will make sure that the contracted entities are meeting their timetables and they're in compliance with the local and environmental laws. Additionally, in the event that there is an underperforming contracted entity, we want to get them back on the right track. We want to implement a performance improvement plan, and that will ensure that the project's long-term stability is in place, and it will protect the taxpayer's investment. And our final challenge is the issue of land acquisition and the supplemental construction projects that accompany building a high-speed railway. And now constructing this railway will bring about a different set of considerations, ones that were not considered in the railways of the past. These railways of the future will require upgraded electrical systems. They require new and remodeled stations. They require fencing to secure the perimeter and ensure public safety. And they require that there's open land without grade crossing. And in managing these demands, the contracted entities perhaps they'll run into issues of eminent domain and local building laws. So in order to find the best solution, we want to make sure that we're operating under clear and concise guidelines, that we have a clear procedure in place so that we know exactly how we approach land acquisition, exactly how we approach the construction process. In doing so, we'll ensure that the community is treated fairly, that we'll use fair market values to compensate for lost property. And treating the community fairly, we're fostering that support that's going to be necessary for the long-term success of this project. And at this time, we'd love to hear from you. We'd welcome any questions or concerns that you may have, and we'd love to address them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay. So one question about the RIDE model that you proposed. Should we assume that each of those four criteria then would be equally weighted in terms of how we would evaluate program implementation, for example, against the environmental issues, for example, or any of the other considerations?
So we believe that it is a case-by-case basis, and from what we learned from FRC through client interviews, that we do not believe that you're going to find a situation when you get to the nuts and bolts level that two bids are exactly the same. We believe that it's going to be apparent by going through these 4 criterion that it will be apparent which one is the best option. So we don't want to kind of pigeonhole and constrain us into a weighted system. We want to make sure that's dynamic and is able to adapt with each case.
So say that one more time. Are you suggesting that as different bidders come through the process, there'll be a sliding scale of weighting to your criteria, or to make sure? Because I think at the end you said it's got to be fair and equitable and consistent to get people to bid. So I just want to make sure are you setting a standard, or are you changing the standard?
So what we're not going to do is go on to a hard weighted standard, i.e. one is worth 10 points, one is worth 9 points. Because at the end of the day, if one bid gets a score of 19 and one bid gets a score of 18, we don't really know what that means. We don't really know if the 19-point bid's better than the 18-point bid. So we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves specifically into the idea that we're going to have very limited and constrained scoring criteria, but rather we're going to allow for discretion, look at a case-by-case basis. Because based on our FRC interviews, it's not based on simply going down a list. It's based on looking at the nuts and bolts level, looking at it holistically. So we believe the RIDE model gives a guideline for what you should be looking through, what you should be trying to identify. But simply assigning a point value, we don't think allows for the best ability to actually use discretion and actually be able to discover what is the best option.
I want to make sure I understand that. You're suggesting that capital, independent, private sector investors come through a process where they will receive a score, but yet you will make a different decision based on your discretion than the process that they went through.
There's no score.
Okay.
These are a set of
Make sure I understand.
factors that will be used so that you can decide. You can use these factors. You look at how they're going to implement the program. You look at the environmental costs. And we're not giving a score because at the end of the day, like he said, if there were a score, for example, if we did set a numeric score to this, what is the difference between an 18 and a 19? Maybe that 19 was a little bit maybe it addressed a little bit more of an environmental concern. But in that specific community, maybe the environmental interests are not as strong as perhaps another economic interest within the state and local level and creating jobs. So communities are dynamic and they're different, and we need to be able to adapt to that. So giving this guide will allow us to kind of have a standard by which to hold these companies accountable, but it will also allow for discretion because that is necessary for a successful project.
I have a quick question.
Yeah,
First
please.
of all, you had me at the acronym. I love that. Okay. Anytime you can put an acronym to something, you're ahead of the game.
Yeah.
And I tell you, but it has to be defendable. And I like the logic that you had behind it. So it wasn't just an acronym for the acronym's sake. I like the breakdown of it. I do have the concerns about bidding on something and then being told that, by the way, we use some other discretion after you've given us a very logical approach. So I think, and then the only question I'd have is maybe more of a statement than a question, but if you can go back through your stakeholder sets, I think you have them in a circle down on the.
Sorry,
That's okay.
these guys.
The one thing I would ask about is it seems that there are stakeholders for each set that are either government or public, but I thought that an element of what we were trying to do was achieve private business investment in ROI, and I don't see any stakeholder community set from the commercial enterprise. And I was wondering if that was a decision that you made or how you came to want to address them.
Yeah, so I mean, we identified on the R slide, even though it wasn't in the circle, that we have private partner investors in one of the bulleted areas because ultimately we wanted to identify sources of funding, but we didn't necessarily include it in the one circled area.
So you are taking them into consideration as a
Absolutely.
Good, I think that's it. Good job.
Good job.